there's this idea, another nugget of gold. Maybe that'll be the title of this episode. Nuggets of gold.
Nuggets of gold. Maybe not. I'm Maya Lane.
And I'm Michael. And we're on the grad school journey to becoming licensed therapists.
Come with us to class as we discuss and dissect all we can learn about mental health, relationships, therapy techniques, and everything in between.
With your two favorite therapists in training, this is Therapy in Progress.
Michael.
Hey, Maya Lane.
We need to catch everybody up on what's been going on in our classes.
There is so much to talk about.
There is.
We realize that we are almost at the end of our first year in the program.
It's gone by in a flash.
I was going to say I can't decide because on one hand, it's gone by so fast. On the other hand, feels like a long time ago that we started.
Yeah.
We realized that there are so many nuggets of gold that we wanted to fit in that just haven't quite had a place yet.
Yeah.
In any other episode. So we want to take this episode to really kind of get back to the roots of the idea of this podcast, which was pull back the curtain, talking about class, our training, the things we're learning, the things that are exciting us.
Bringing you guys into the classroom with us.
Yes.
So you can see exactly what your therapist, or if you want to become a therapist yourself, see what that process looks like.
Yeah. So this is our Nugget of Gold episode where we're going to have a chance to catch up on everything exciting and interesting. Before we jump into all the amazing content, we have kind of an exciting update on the Maya Lane side of things. You got chosen to give a presentation at this big fancy symposium that our school does once a year.
Yeah, well, when you say it like that, it sounds really fun.
Is it not exactly true, though?
Well, let me share a little bit about this. So there was an email that went out to all of us about this research symposium that was being held in Switzerland. And I just wanted to see if my research, I do a little bit of research on intimacy in the age of AI.
So cool.
And I mean, it's like a hyperfixation for me at this point, but I had this literature review that I did and I really liked it. And I was thinking about getting it published, but I didn't know if it was good enough. So I just reached out and was like, hey, I'm a master's level student. I don't know if you're accepting us, but I wanted to submit my research and see if I could be a part of the symposium. And they were like, we love the topic, please send it in. So I sent in my abstract and a little more information, and they were like, we want you to give a presentation.
That's so badass.
At this symposium.
You're so cool.
So, I mean, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Intimacy in the age of AI. We need to do an episode on that.
We will. We definitely will.
At least one. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into our classes then. Let's get into these little nuggets. So far, what has been your main big takeaway that you would want listeners to know?
Can I go class by class?
Absolutely.
Okay, because this semester, every class has been a home run. It's been such a fun semester, so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's both kind of go through our week and do the big picture of each class. So for me, Monday is law and ethics, which is a fascinating nuts and bolts class. What I would want people to take away from that is the depth and specificity of the rules that we have to follow.
Yeah.
So the classes and the field, it's split into two general things. There's law and there's ethics. So the law is what it sounds like, the very specific state statutes that we have to learn about what you can do, what you cannot do. This has to do with reporting and keeping records of client treatment. And for example, a kind of random interesting thing we learned is that you can treat a minor without parent consent.
Yes.
If two things. Number one, the minor is at least 12 years old. Number two, you judge as a clinician that they are mature enough to intelligently participate in treatment. So that's not something that a clinician is just going to magically know.
Yeah.
Right? We have to learn these things because we have to follow the rules of the profession. So that's the law side of it. And then the ethics side of it is equally important, but a little more abstract. These are things we talk about in terms of relationships with clients, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate.
Lots of talk about dual relationships.
What's
or
a
multiple
dual
relationships?
What is a dual or multiple relationship?
Yeah. So when you're a therapist and you have a relationship with a client, that's a therapeutic relationship. That's the only relationship that you really should ethically have with that client. If you were to, let's say, be on the same casual baseball team with that client, or you have a mutual friend with this client, or this is your sister's partner.
That could be...
It could get tricky because now you might have bias. You know this person outside of the context of the therapeutic relationship, and that could interfere with the process of therapy.
Yeah. So anytime the therapeutic relationship blurs into another kind of relationship, that's what we call a multiple or a dual relationship. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, I mean, there's the obvious ones that you must never do, like having a romantic relationship with a client.
Right.
But sometimes the line gets blurred. If a client that you've been working with for a long time invites you to their wedding, or you're treating a child and they want you to come to their school play. So these are times where it might be appropriate to blur the lines if you judge it to be therapeutically beneficial. Mm-hmm. So we have those conversations and we talk about all that kind of stuff. And it's really a case-by-case basis when it comes to ethics. Yeah. But law is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
So this idea of like, obviously it is unethical to treat people you know, right? We don't treat friends or family members or even significant others of our friends. Mm-hmm. You really want to keep those separate. Why?
Well, because it's just not possible to perform therapy on somebody that you know. You know too much information about them and you're biased. You can't come from an unbiased position.
You have your own emotional stuff wrapped up in it, so you can't possibly be objective. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I've had people say like, oh, I have like my sister just went through a breakup. I need you to do therapy on her. I'm like, I literally cannot.
Yeah.
If I could, maybe I would, but I literally can't.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Not only is it not ethical, but we can't. It's the same kind of thing where you can't perform therapy on yourself. Mm-hmm. It's like people are like, oh, you're a therapist. You have all the tools and all the tricks. Like, why do you have any issues? Because you can't follow your own advice. Mm-mm. You know, you have to go to your own therapist for that.
Yeah.
Because you're too wrapped up in your own stuff and too biased to really be objective. And there are definitely therapists that specialize in treating other mental health professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we need it. We're kind of just like a Russian doll of therapists. Your therapist has a therapist, their therapist has a therapist. We all just have our own therapist.
Does that mean that somewhere there's like the final boss of therapy who's at like the top of the food chain and like has no one else to go to?
That would be awful.
Who does that person
go to? Do you just
like
loop back
it's
to
a
like
circle.
The first person? It's just like cylindrical. Perfect, yeah. Okay, I have like a kind of not okay question.
I love a not okay question.
Okay. Have you ever tried therapeutic techniques on people that you know?
You know, I think about it a lot, and I personally don't, because whenever I encounter a situation where it feels like, oh, this would be the time, I don't see a way of doing it that wouldn't come across as like pretentious or condescending, right? Because there is a real difference between being in a therapy room, therapist-client, versus a talk between friends or, you know, on an equal playing field. So I feel like and obviously it's like the active listening techniques that we're trained in and how to ask good questions and how to hold space, things like that are absolutely applicable in day-to-day life.
For sure.
But I'm not going to like sit someone down and use the empty chair technique because I don't know, using specific interventions like that, I think would just be weird. But that's how I feel. Maybe that's just like my angle at it. How do you feel?
Well, I have.
Oh, yeah?
A little bit.
And how has that gone?
Like you were saying, you can't do techniques like the empty chair technique with Gestalt therapy, but you can do Socratic questioning. I've done like the miracle question with people. So that big question of like, if you woke up tomorrow morning and you had everything you wanted, this problem that you had was just gone, what would your life be like? That question I've asked.
And how does that usually land?
It lands.
Oh, good.
It does land.
That's great.
But like I was saying, you can't actually do therapy on people that you know.
Right. Totally.
But you can use these like certain techniques. I don't know. I experiment. Maybe it's a no-no, but like
I had do you ever feel like, now that I know we're kind of going on a tangent, we'll get back to class in a second. Do you ever feel like because you're studying this and the people in your life know that you're sometimes held to this standard? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I feel like sometimes the people in my life expect me to always be functioning at this hyper empathetic, like, you know, loving. And it's like, yeah, at our core, we are that just as people, because that's kind of the kind of person who tends to get into this field.
Yeah.
But also like we're human beings and I'm going to have a reaction sometimes and I'm going to talk crap sometimes. And it's like,
yeah, we're still human beings.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to react like human beings.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we do know these certain skills that we can teach other people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've internalized them for ourselves. We don't have this special magic that makes us superhumans.
Right.
We don't have this like divine wisdom.
And it's somewhere in between. I do believe that a really good therapist at their core perhaps is, more open-minded, non-judgmental, empathetic than your average person. But that doesn't mean that they're going to 100% of the time be operating on that level.
Yeah.
Because when we're off the clock, we're off the clock. And then when we're on the clock, we can click into that.
There is something to be said, though, about a therapist who has done the work for themselves versus a therapist who has not.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said if you know what it feels like to sit on the client side of things. That really informs the process.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because you know what it feels like to be in that chair and to be vulnerable in that way. And you can meet someone there.
Yeah. So law and ethics. Our little tangent. So law and ethics is really just all about learning the nuts and bolts. I think people may or may not know, separate from like the overall licensing exam to get our license, we also have a completely separate law and ethics exam for California.
Yeah.
So you need to know all the tiny little specificities of it.
This is something that's emphasized in our field all the time. And it's a pamphlet that we actually have to keep on us as well, which is therapy never includes sex.
We physically have to have those pamphlets on hand because one of the rules is what? If it is reported to us that a client, like if a client ever tells you that they had a relationship with a past therapist, we don't report that or anything, but we do have to take care of the client. So one of the things we have to do is give them that pamphlet that goes over all of those things, how therapy never includes sexual behavior.
And the reason that we cannot report this therapist is not because we don't want to, but because it would be breaking confidentiality. We have to protect our client first.
Right. It's all about protecting the client. So we can make them aware that there are ways to report if they choose to, but it does not fall on us to do in that specific instance.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are things that we do report if there are
imminent threat to self or others.
Right. So issues of safety, issues of abuse, things like that are things that we may have to report depending on the specific situation.
Right.
And even within those situations, it gets very specific. Is it reportable or is it not? But I think that's a really good point. What you said, these laws and these ethics, they exist. I'd say like 80% of them exist to protect the client. We want to keep the client safe. Maybe 20% of them are there because the therapists need to protect themselves in terms of liability and things like that. But really, the field has built these norms that we have to follow because we're trying to keep therapy safe for the people who are the patients.
Absolutely, because we're in such a power position. We need to make sure that we're acting not just within the laws, but also within the bounds of ethics. Are we working within our scope of competence? Is this the right fit? Like, we really need to make sure that we're working in the best interest of the client, and that's the way our field is centered. Not around necessarily protecting the therapist, although there are some, but predominantly, like you were saying, it's about protecting the client.
Yeah. So I hope people take away that if you're seeing a therapist and assuming they're doing things correctly, they are following a very specific set of codes to keep you safe and to protect your information and to treat you to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Monday. Shall we move on to Tuesday?
Let's go to Tuesday.
So we have this class together. This is psychopharmacology.
Yes.
What would you want people to take away from psychopharm?
Well, psychopharmacology is the study of pharmaceuticals or medications within the field of psychology. So this is looking at more of a psychiatrist versus a psychologist or versus a therapist. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who went to medical school and can prescribe medication within the realm of mental health and mental disorders. So we're studying psychopharmacology as therapists because we need to have this understanding of psychotropic medications, so medications for mental illnesses or mental disorders.
So it's kind of fun, even though as therapists, we will not be recommending or prescribing medication, anything like that. For the purposes of this class, we kind of get to play dress up and pretend to be prescribers just so that we can learn about it.
Right, because as therapists, we need to have this baseline understanding of how these medications are impacting our clients, or how can we expect it to help our clients? What kind of side effects should we be looking out for? Are there any contraindications? Like if they have any kind of condition or they're using some other medication that we know might be interfering with their prescribed medication.
Yeah, we also want to be able to intelligently collaborate with their psychiatrist.
Exactly.
So we need to know about all of this stuff so that we can be a part of the process, even if we are not directly prescribing or even recommending any medications.
And it's so important to be able to collaborate with the psychiatrist and be in contact with them. Another side of it, though, is that most people, when they're prescribed psychotropic medications, it's from their primary care physician, not a psychiatrist. So that makes it even more important for us to understand what these medications are and how they are impacting our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And to tie this into law and ethics, by the way, just because we referenced collaboration, the therapist can't just magically talk to your other doctors.
Right.
You have to give them permission through what's called an ROI, a release of information. So it's very specific. You have to sign a document that says, this is who you're allowed to contact. This is the information you're allowed to discuss with them. Mm-hmm. So even then, when we are collaborating for the client's care, it is within the scope of law and ethics and being very specific about all of that.
Confidentiality is so important in therapy. Really, anything that you share with your therapist, that's kept confidential under the laws and under the ethics. Mm-hmm.
Maybe one day we can do an episode on what we would have to report. Mm-hmm. Things that are by law reportable, which are things like imminent violence, abuse, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll talk about informed consent and confidentiality.
Yeah.
Because those are really just the hallmarks, the foundation of what therapy is.
Yeah. So bringing it back to psychopharmacology, what do you want people to take away?
There's a lot, but I think the main takeaway that I would want people to know is that while your therapist may be knowledgeable about these medications, they cannot prescribe or recommend them. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I think just how complicated the field of psychiatry and psychopharmacology is. Mm-hmm. You know, it's always a case-by-case thing. Some presentations shouldn't be treated with medication. Some really should. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of public opinion about mental health medications. It's a very hot button issue for a lot of people. Yeah. Sometimes things are overprescribed. Sometimes things are underprescribed. Mm-hmm. There are some instances where people really need certain medications to be functional. Mm-hmm. And there are other times where I think too often we throw medications on things that should actually first be treated with therapy, which our book talks a lot about. Like, this is when therapy comes in, and at this point, this is when medication comes in.
And sometimes the reverse, too, because there are times when you need medication in order to be effective in therapy.
Totally, to kind of even out an acute crisis in order to get things to the point where therapy can be effective. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot to consider.
Yeah.
Should we move into Wednesday?
Let's do it.
So my Wednesday class is a bit of a broader techniques of psychotherapy class, which you are also in, but a different professor.
Right.
So this is techniques. And I like our techniques class because it is kind of broader. It allows us to have these really wide-ranging conversations just about the philosophy of therapy and different things like that. Mm-hmm. I'm really pumped about one thing that she told us recently. I was like, why didn't you tell us this on like day one of this entire program? Because it made things so clear to me. Mm-hmm. Our professor sees the practice of therapy as this like 3-tiered pyramid. So the way she describes it is that the base of that pyramid, which are the skills that need to underlie any therapeutic orientation or modality, these are the interpersonal skills that we have to learn. So this is all about reflecting feelings and open questions versus closed questions and using silence as a tool and what we call attending behaviors, which are those more basic, maybe eye contact, body language, how to really hold space for a person. Yeah. So each one of these little things that I just mentioned has chapters written about them and how to use them effectively in our textbooks. Mm-hmm. So that's that base layer. And then that next intermediate level of the pyramid is, what is your theoretical orientation as a therapist? Are you psychodynamic? Do you use cognitive therapy? Do you use ACT or dialectical behavior therapy or a combination, right? Yeah. So it's, what have you been trained in? What are your technical views on therapy? Mm-hmm. And is it relevant for this client and this client's problems? Yeah. Because not every orientation or modality is going to be appropriate for every client, right? If you're dealing with childhood trauma, you might want something more psychodynamic versus something more present and future focused. You know, it just depends. Right. So that's the middle. What is your actual theoretical orientation? And then only then the top of the pyramid coming from that middle section is, what are the actual techniques and interventions that you're using with this client? Mm-hmm. What exercises are you employing? What homework are you giving them? What kinds of conversations are you having? How are you using those first 2 levels to actually get in there and do the therapeutic work?
Wow.
So when she described it like that, I was like, that makes so much sense. And I'm so glad that it was described that way, because that really makes the entire field so clear to me, you know? How about your techniques class? What's going on in there?
What I really like about the techniques class is that we get to do a lot of role plays. So I don't know about for your class, but we do a role play for every single class. People get to volunteer. And then we also have an assignment where we're paired up with somebody in a dyad. So 2 people, one person plays the clinician, one person plays the client, and you switch off. And you role play therapy using one of the theoretical orientations that we learned about and the techniques that fall under that orientation.
Is the client playing a character or being themselves as a human?
We get the option to choose, but I feel like it is more effective if you bring in your own life.
Yeah.
So I was paired with somebody for the actual assignment that we have to record. We have to do an audio recording and transcribe it.
And then bring it into class for feedback.
Yes.
So that both the professors and the students can listen and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. You were using this skill. It's like, it's really cool to get into the weeds of it.
So I role played as a veteran. I am not a veteran. But I learned a lot about veterans in researching what a veteran client might be like and what kind of experiences they might have had. So that was really cool for me to learn about, but also for him to get that experience of role playing a client that he would actually want to work with in the field. And then I told him, when he asked me what kind of population I wanted to work with, I was like, well, I want to be a sex therapist. And he was like, oh, okay. And then like, we kind of didn't talk about it again. So I was like, I don't know if he's going to role play or if he's going to bring in his own life. Like, I don't know. But when we got there, he surprised me and he brought his wife with him. And he was like, can you do like real couples counseling with us? And I was like, yes, absolutely.
Whoa.
So we did. And they brought in their real life, like couples issues that they were dealing with.
So you were just thrown into it.
I was just thrown into it. But that was I think the best way to go about it for the moment, because I couldn't psych myself out and get myself nervous about it. I just kind of did the thing.
That's great. You know, I had the opposite experience, which was a problem for me when I went into my first session for that assignment where we were doing our therapy session out of class time.
Yeah.
I was really nervous. And so I went in super prepared and like, I was like, okay, this is what, and that's not the way to do it because I went in with this preconceived notion of like, this is what I want the session to look like, but it's not up to the therapist. So I felt that first session was not very natural because I had been nervous and I had come in what I thought was a really good thing, hyper prepared, right? Yeah. But in fact, what I've learned since then is it is a lot easier to go in if you are just kind of ready to receive whatever the client is going to throw at you and you go with them where it needs to go.
Yeah.
So that was a great learning experience for me that I have to be more flexible.
Yeah, because you do come in with that more cognitive, analytical mind.
Yeah.
So.
That is actually something I've been learning a lot in our techniques class. With the feedback that I've been getting from the professor and everything and listening to the audios, I tend to be a very like cerebral and analytical person, very academic, which is really important in a lot of ways for this because therapy is a scientific pursuit in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
But what I'm learning is that approach not only is not going to work for every client, but especially it's not going to work right away. I've really been learning I need to slow down and really focus in the beginning on that other half of therapy, which is really just about the space and the validation and the empathy and creating a setting where somebody feels safe to open up, right?
Yeah.
So they've really, in this class, been encouraging me to slow down and to get out of my own head because I'm so excited to rush into solutions and to techniques and things like that.
Yeah.
But I have been learning that I need to really nurture that other half of it, which is really just about the relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
I found that was what helped people in these role plays to open up and so that I could meet them on the human level. Because I can also really easily get to that place where I had a professor call it like prissy cat mode, where I was like very professional and like definitely taking it from like this, I am the therapist, you are the client, and like I have this expertise and I'm going to guide this in this direction. And I honestly didn't like how that felt even while I was doing that role play because I want to meet people on the human level. It's a collaborative effort, I feel. So while I do have this certain knowledge, it's based on what I'm talking about with the client that I would bring those things forward instead of being like, okay, I want to use this technique and that technique, and
Sure.
I want to hit all these points in the session, because that's not how conversation flows.
Totally.
You never know what someone's going to come in with.
Yeah.
Like, I might think, oh, we're going to be talking about Jane Doe's relationship with her partner. And then all of a sudden we're talking about grief.
Yeah.
Like, I can't control it at all.
Yeah.
So I found that being able to connect with people just on that human level and have a conversation and build that rapport first helps people to be open to anything that I would have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But really, they're guiding where we go, and then I'm facilitating the intervention through that.
So when you threw yourself into this unexpected couples counseling with your class partner and his wife, how did it go? Like,
it actually went really well.
That's so cool.
They feel like they got a lot out of it. We're going to be doing it again, too. Because we have another round, and they were like, yeah, we absolutely want to do it again.
Oh, they're coming back for more.
They're coming back for more.
I love it.
So, but they really reflected. And from what they've told me since then, like, they've actually worked on it, and they talk about it. And, you know, they feel like they got a lot of value out of it. And the day after the session, he'd sent me, like, a voice message being like, thank you so much for that. Like, we got so much out of it. We were impressed by your wisdom. Like, how old are you?
Oh my God. See, I'm older than you, but I want to be you when I grow up.
I want to be you when I grow up. So on it.
That's so cool. So before we move on, main takeaway from our techniques class, something you would want people to carry forward?
Each therapist is going to have their own way of approaching therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, the theoretical orientation you were talking about, that middle section on the pyramid, that's typically based on your therapist's worldview.
Mm.
If you see a therapist and it's not resonating for some reason, it could just be the wrong theoretical orientation for you.
Yeah.
So there's no harm in saying, this isn't working for me. I think I'm going to try out a different modality. I'm going to try a different theoretical orientation. Yeah. So maybe you were in Gestalt and it was very confrontational. Yeah. And you're like, I think I need something a little bit more gentle than this.
Yeah.
Then you could try like a more person-centered approach.
Yeah. You like Gestalt.
I love
Which is funny because it is known for being rather confrontational and you have such a sweet and gentle demeanor. But you told me a story about how you were doing it in class and you like it. You're so good at it.
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
Actually, because I thought I would like Gestalt for myself. Mm-hmm. Like, I thought that would be really fun for me to experience and to be confronted in that way. Yeah, but when I did the role play, which was another time I was not expecting to do a role play in that capacity, it went surprisingly well. And it was a really, really powerful, the techniques of Gestalt are really, really powerful. Yeah. And for me, because I have a background as a yoga instructor and someone who just like loves yoga, it brings in the somatic aspect. So you're in your body and you're really grounded in the sensations and in the movements that you're doing. So
because so much of an emotion is a physical sensation.
Yes.
And that sounds really woo-woo, but it's not. Because think about it. What is feeling nervous? It's your eyes dilating. It's your heart racing. It's feeling a little sweaty, maybe dizzy. But also, what does it feel like to be in love? It's your eyes dilating. It's your heart racing. Your hands getting sweaty. You feel a little. So it's like, then what is an emotion if not physical sensations plus a context?
Yeah.
That's kind of freaking crazy.
It's amazing too, because a lot of people can't identify what it is that they're feeling. They just haven't connected with themselves in that way. But being able to connect it with those bodily sensations.
Because that's like, if I asked you out of a body right now to describe to me what does it feel like to be afraid, it's so abstract. You can't really. So all we have to cling to, if you really take a step back, is, okay, when I'm afraid, I feel like my stomach is clenching. I feel it's really physical. So Gestalt, while it may sound a little woo-woo coming from Mylene, our yoga instructor, it's getting people in touch with what is your experience right now of this thing that you are labeling as fear or anxiety or sadness or whatever it might be.
Right.
It's so important.
It reminds me of something that we learned actually in our psychopharmacology class, which had to do with anxiety, which there's two types of anxiety that I didn't even know about.
This is a great golden nugget.
Yes. This is probably my favorite nugget
yes.
that I've learned so far, which is there's two types of anxiety. There's top-down anxiety and there's bottom-up anxiety.
This is so good. Give it to me.
Yes. So top-down anxiety starts in your mind. So you experience something externally, maybe it's a certain situation or a certain thought that passes you by, and it causes you to go into a thought spiral. And then through those thoughts, then you experience the bodily sensations. You feel your heart racing, your palms are getting sweaty, your breath is a little bit out of control. It's a little faster.
So it's cognitively based.
Right.
So you're starting with a thought process or a rumination or something like that spirals out of control and then creates the body anxiety.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's top down.
So it starts at the head and then it goes into the body.
Mm-hmm.
From bottom up anxiety is the opposite. You just start feeling nervous. You get that pit in your stomach. You start getting maybe a little jittery. Your heart's racing. And then you're like, why am I anxious? What am I anxious about? And then that starts the thought spiral. And that starts the rumination.
And it moves up into your head.
So it starts in your body and then it moves up into your head.
And people might ask, well, why did it start in the first place? The reason bottom up starts is because subconsciously you were triggered by something that was buried deep in your hippocampus, that some kind of past experience, something you might not even be aware of is triggering to you. And without you realizing it, it started this body response that you then notice, and then it travels up into your mind. So the reason this is so cool and so important is that treating these anxieties, you approach them differently.
Yes.
Top down, you're going to want a more cognitive approach because you're going to want to start by tackling the thoughts because that's where it's originating. Bottom up, you're probably going to want something more mindfulness-based or relaxation-based or somatic-based or even psychodynamic. You want to say, okay, let's kind of dive deeper. What triggered me in the first place? Right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I feel like that is so important for a clinician to know that when somebody comes in and says, I'm experiencing anxiety, it's as simple as asking, okay, how are you experiencing it? Walk me through the process of when you start feeling anxious so that I, as a clinician, can hear, is it top down or is it bottom up? That way I know how to help you. I know what orientation to use.
Because imagine that you are someone with bottom up anxiety and you're seeing your clinician and they didn't ask you that question. So now they're assuming that it started with a thought. And so, but that's not how anxiety starts for you. It starts in the body. And then it becomes like your thoughts and the rumination. So they're trying to instill maybe a CBT technique in you, cognitive behavioral therapy, but you don't know what thoughts are coming up because there wasn't any.
Right.
So then it creates a different form of anxiety where you're experiencing top down and bottom up anxiety.
I'm sure. It can exacerbate it.
Yeah.
So really, I loved that nugget because I was like, oh, that's such a simple way to organize different types of anxiety and to really, like, if I'm coming in as a new therapist and I'm overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. Now I know where to start. Oh, describe your anxiety to me. I know if I'm going to go in a mindfulness direction or a cognitive direction or whatever. Great nugget. Should we move on to the class that you're in that I'm not?
Yes.
Which is what?
I'm in couples and family therapy. The first one. We have two parts. This is the first one. I'm really excited for you to take this class.
I know.
It is amazing.
What is your biggest takeaway from that class?
One thing that I think is really important for people to know is that when a couple or a family comes in for therapy, the clinician is treating them as one unit, not just as individual people. So the couple is one unit of therapy, and then the family is one unit of therapy. And
so that unit is the client.
Exactly.
So the family itself is the client, not any individual within it.
Right.
Because I think it's important to know that, like, a good couple or family therapist is not going to side with people, right? It's not to decide who's right, who's wrong. It's really, how can we help this unit achieve whatever goals they came into therapy for or function more effectively or whatever the goal is.
Also because it would be impossible to satisfy each individual to the fullest extent as you would in individual therapy. So what you're trying to do is not have any bias towards any one person that you feel you resonate with the most, but trying to find a solution that works for everybody in the family as a unit and giving them the tools to be able to handle those issues on their own.
And I think it's really important to keep in mind that you have to be sensitive to what goal did they come into therapy for. Some couples come into couple counseling because they know they want to separate and they want to do it amicably and healthily.
Yeah.
It is not your place as the therapist to try to keep them together.
Right. Or on the other side of it, if they're coming in for infidelity and they're trying to stay together, it is not your place as a therapist to bring in your opinion and say, no, you should separate.
Right. You're trying to benefit the unit. Yeah, there's this idea of, this is another little golden nugget for you listeners, the idea of bracketing, which is what we learn, which is, I'm trying to remember like the academic definition. It's like the therapist suspending their values, not letting go of them, but suspending them so that they don't come into the therapy room.
Right.
So what that means is I, as the therapist, am not going to impose my own values or my own belief system. I'm going to respect what the client wants and needs. So the metaphor for this is like the client comes in and their goal for therapy is to become, I don't know, brave enough to paint their house purple. You, as the therapist, purple is your least favorite color. You fucking hate purple. That is not relevant in this case. So you're going to bracket those feelings. You're going to suspend that. And you're going to say, what's important in this therapeutic relationship is that I don't care that I don't like purple. I'm going to help my client paint their house purple because that is their goal.
Yeah.
That's what bracketing is. And a good therapist should be really good at that because you don't want to cloud your judgment or contaminate the therapeutic process.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, though.
It's really, really hard to do, especially with your really deeply held beliefs, or if you're someone who's deeply religious, bringing that into the therapy room, that could be really, really challenging. But like you were saying, a good clinician is going to be able to bracket and say, this client in their own world, in their own reality, that is much more important than what I have in my background, in my own life.
Yeah.
It's about the client and helping them live the life that they want to live.
Yeah. Now, obviously, it's within reason, right? There are some things that are obviously right and wrong.
Yeah.
If your client comes in and they say, it is my value that I'm going to go, burn down my house tomorrow, you're not going to want to help them do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So my last class for the week is on Thursday, and it's practicum. But I think that we should talk about that in another episode.
Yes, we'll dive into the whole practicum thing.
Because there's so much there.
Yeah.
But we did take one other class together. That was a shorter class.
Yeah, it was like more seminar style.
Exactly.
So we had like 2 8-hour days, which was long but awesome.
And this was for human sexuality and intimacy.
Yes, which Mayolaine, our resident future sex therapist, was very excited about. So let's start. How did you feel about the class?
So I've heard a lot of things about this class, and that it's very hit or miss because it's really dependent on if your professor teaches it well. We were lucky. We had an actual sex therapist who was able to teach this class.
He was awesome.
He did amazing.
Loved him. He was so cool.
Because this class was so short, it really couldn't get into any specific topic in any great depth. But I feel like what he was able to cover in that kind of high-level overview was really, really great.
We hit all the bullet points. So we covered anatomy. We covered sexual disorders, things that you would find in the DSM. We covered infidelity. We covered sexuality during pregnancy. That was all kind of the day one stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the second day, it got a little more into things like alternative relationships and kinks and fetishes and
gender identity
and expression and transgenderism and all sorts of really fascinating things that people come into sex therapy for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The readings were also really, really good.
Yeah.
There was a book on how to do sex therapy. And there was also another book called The Ethical Slut.
The Ethical Slut.
Yeah.
Which is basically broadening your horizons of what love and a relationship can look like.
Yeah.
Because societally, we have always known monogamy as the way to go. But some newer age thinking are people who are in alternative relationships, polyamorous relationships, and they do so in an ethical and healthy way where everyone is satisfied.
Yeah. It was really great to be able to have a reading like that, though, because most people are not exposed to that kind of relationship dynamic or that way of viewing sex, sexuality, and relationships.
Yeah.
So being able to read it in that context was absolutely fascinating. And then one of the supplementary readings is a book that I just want to give a shout out to because it changed my life. And I think that it's really helpful for a lot of people, especially cisgender women. That's who it's mostly catered to. But it is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski.
What's it about?
It is about for women who are experiencing any range of sexual dysfunction or lack of understanding of their bodies or how they show up sexually in their relationships or with themselves. This book really dives into all the different experiences someone might have with sex and sexuality and different solutions that they might have and normalizing all the range of experiences that you might have.
That's awesome. Yeah, and another thing I just want to point out, one of the reasons that this class is a shorter seminar style is because to become a sex therapist is its own certification, its own training. It's a whole nother extra level of thing. So that's why we didn't get too deep into it in this curriculum. But I know that you, after graduation, are going to go get certified immediately.
Oh, absolutely. That's the first thing I'm going to do. I mean, I do have my own personal thoughts, if I'm getting on my soapbox, about having it be so limited in this course, just because sex and sexuality are just things that are going to come across a therapy room.
It's a fundamental part of life.
It's just a being human.
Yeah.
We experience these things. So it's a part of our lives, and every therapist really needs to have at least a baseline understanding of how sex and sexuality are integral parts of someone's life and how they experience the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I would have taken 2-3 semesters of that class.
No, for sure.
Absolutely.
There was so much there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm excited to get certified.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I thought of one more nugget that I want to get to.
Ooh.
Because earlier in the episode, we were talking about thoughts and feelings. Mm-hmm. We had this awesome conversation in our techniques class about how thoughts and feelings are not the same thing, first of all. Mm-hmm. And something really common that will happen in therapy is a client comes in with really harsh self-criticism. They'll be talking about, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart, I'm not attractive, whatever it might be. Those sound like feelings that the client is having. Those are actually all just thoughts. Mm-hmm. By definition, they're evaluating something, right? Those are thoughts. Underneath them are feelings that are probably really uncomfortable to feel. Things like disappointment or vulnerability or sadness or frustration. Those are actual feelings. So what our professor argues is that feelings, which are really scary to feel, and thoughts are somewhat safer to feel, or to experience, I should say. Mm-hmm. So what happens is this hijack, where instead of feeling those uncomfortable feelings, the thought hijack happens. But in this case, we end up at a place where the thoughts are actually even more damaging and more detrimental than those feelings would have been. Wow. Because the thoughts are those self-critical statements, right? Mm-hmm. So what she says is that our job as the therapist, in this case, is to put the car in reverse and say, whoa, let's back up. Mm-hmm. What is underneath this? What are you actually feeling that is so uncomfortable to feel? Are you feeling sadness at something? Are you feeling frustration at something? Mm-hmm. The idea is that if you become familiar with those feelings and you learn how to move through them and experience them and accept them instead of running away from them, mm-hmm. that thought hijack is not going to be relevant anymore. You're not going to have to hide behind thoughts that actually end up, ironically, being even more damaging to you. Wow. So the idea is that all that kind of self-talk, and this is broader, it can extend to any kind of thoughts that you're having that are unhealthy or unhelpful to you. Mm-hmm. If you can back up and actually learn how to sit with the underlying feelings, you're not going to have any need for those thoughts. Yeah. I thought that was such a brilliant way to think about it.
That is a brilliant way to think about it. And it even extends further than the thoughts. It could also be pathology. Like how are these symptoms helping you to be able to cope? Like how has this empowered you? How has this helped you? A lot of times we can think of this as like maladaptive behaviors, mm-hmm. but the truth is that those things have helped us in the past. That's why we do them. Mm-hmm. That's why we think certain thoughts, because they helped us to be able to avoid something that we thought was going to hurt us more. But then it stops being helpful and it starts being inhibiting. Yeah. And then that's when we can say, put the car in reverse. What's actually happening here? And then let's figure out a constructive way to deal with these. It also extends to relationships too, as well. A lot of times what can happen is we can have cognitive distortions with our partners. Let's say we've asked our partner to do the dishes and then they don't do the dishes. And now we're like, they're so unreliable. I can't depend on them for anything. You've overgeneralized it. They just didn't do the dishes this one time. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was a pattern.
So those are the thoughts.
That's the thought.
What's the feeling underneath it?
But the feeling underneath it is, I'm alone in this relationship. Mm. I don't have somebody I can depend on. And instead
or I'm frustrated with them.
I'm really frustrated with them. But that's a lot harder to confront than, they didn't do the dishes again.
Yeah.
That's
or I'm at a bar and my partner is looking at that other person.
They must not want to be with me.
They must not want to be with me. What is the underlying emotion is I'm feeling vulnerable. Yeah. I'm feeling unloved or unseen.
And that's a much harder conversation. It's much easier to say, why are you looking at all these girls? Yeah. Versus like, I feel like you don't love me anymore. I feel like you don't desire me anymore.
You really inhabited that character right then. That was really, that was a great performance.
It's a devastating emotion to experience, and it's much harder to confront.
Totally.
So a lot of people just default to anger.
Yeah. Okay. How do you want to wrap up?
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Okay, so in my couples and family therapy class, one of the things that my professor brought up was, who is your ideal client and why would they come to you?
Ooh.
It's a big, big question.
That's a big question.
And get specific with it. Like, who is your ideal client? Whether that be an individual or a couple or a family. Who is that specifically?
That's such a good question. And to be honest, I don't know if I know yet. I don't know if I have an answer to that. I think I'm still kind of building that. I think what presentations I'm really interested in. I'm really interested in OCD, which I can't wait to talk about on the pod. I'm interested in anxiety, which oftentimes comes hand in hand with depression. But beyond that, I don't know if I know what my ideal client looks like quite yet. Do you?
I've been racking my brain on this topic because it's really important to know, because how else can you reach these people if you don't know who they are? So, I mean, I feel like I have two different people in mind, two different clients in mind. I have an individual who I would want to work with, someone who is like a young woman who is tackling her sexual trauma, because I want to be a trauma-informed sex therapist, and being able to help that person through that experience. The other person, the other client, is completely different. It's a couple, middle-aged couple preferably, who is trying to reconnect with each other. So they're coming in for sex therapy, but what we really need to get down to is, how do we meet each other again? Now we're at a totally different phase of our lives. Maybe our kids have moved out. We need to get to know each other again. And so that's really exciting to me too. So two completely different people, but then it comes down to, why would they choose to see you?
What do you, okay, well, let me have it. What do you bring?
I know from talking to people in our program and the feedback that I've gotten from professors that I bring a certain kind of warmth. I know that I'm non-judgmental. I know that I bring a level of understanding and that I can meet people on that human level. But I think at the core of it, connection, intimacy, that's always been the core of why I want to be a therapist. So I think people come to me because they're looking for love, not necessarily from me, but maybe to bring love in their relationship or bring love within themselves. I think that's why people want to come to me.
Yeah. And another thing that I think really works in your favor is that, yes, you do have that kind and gentle atmosphere that you bring, but also, and I'm learning this the more I've learned about you and your past and your high school grunge phase, you have an edge, and you've been through some stuff, and you have a level of depth to you that I think is really fun and kind of comes out in little spurts, and I think will be really helpful in therapy as well.
I think so too. I think that it will help me, but I do also recognize that on people's first meeting me, they only see like the bubbly, like cutesy, like.
But then it turns out you were like emo in high school, and like, weren't you like in a rock band and like? So it's like there's a lot of layers, which is awesome.
Yeah, there's layers to me, like an onion.
I love that movie, Shrek. Is that a Shrek reference? Yeah. Okay. Any last thoughts?
This was a fun episode.
This was a fun conversation. I'm really glad that we got a chance to just kind of fit in all those great, fascinating little details that we wanted to.
Yeah. I love coming back to our roots here and getting into why we even started this podcast in the first place, which was bringing people into the classroom with us.
Yeah.
So if you wanted a little glimpse, this is it.
Yeah. And I like you said, going back to our roots, these are the kinds of conversations that we started our friendship by having.
Yeah.
And now doing a podcast, we can kind of balance the episodes between those more structured, kind of academic-y feeling topics, and then things like this where we're just talking about the field and about what interests us. I think it's super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have started getting some really great messages from people. We love hearing from you, so continue getting in touch with us. Therapy in Progress Pod is our handle on social media. And where can they find the podcast?
You can find the podcast on Spotify Podcasts and on Apple Podcasts.
Absolutely.
Therapy in Progress.
That's us. All right, everyone. We will talk to you next week.
I'm Mylene.
And I'm Michael.
Thanks for coming to class with us.
All right, we'll talk to you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Therapy in Progress is produced for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to substitute for professional medical or mental health care.
Views expressed here are our own. If you're in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed professional.
your mental health matters. Talk to you next time.